morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Five for Breakfast. We're now in our 10th episode of 2025. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Five for Breakfast. Last week, the Fiber Broadband Association held its public policy summit on Wednesday at the AT&T Center on Capitol Hill. We had an amazing lineup of speakers, including Congressman John Joyce from Pennsylvania, Congresswoman Doris Mansui from California, FCC Commissioner Ana Gomez, and Trent Harkreiter, the FCC Chief of the Wireline Bureau. We also had the staff from the Energy and Commerce Committee and from the Senate Commerce Committees. We had Senior Policy Advisor to the Speaker of the House and many other guests that will be playing a key role in broadband for the 119th Congress and the new administration. We followed the Public Policy Summit on Thursday with an industry Hill Day, where our members had numerous meetings both on the House side and the Senate side. And I'll be spending time again this week in Washington as we work with Congress and the White House to help accelerate our efforts to build out our nation's critical broadband infrastructure. Our next DC policy event will be Fiber Day on the Hill on April 9th in the Rayburn building, so you're not going to want to miss that. Our next regional Fiber Connect workshop is coming up on March 25th in Philadelphia. This regional event will definitely sell out. We saw that we were sold out in San Antonio a couple weeks ago, and Philly's been, registration's really been going crazy. So the day after Philly, our policy committee will be heading down to Harrisburg to meet with the state legislature. So please join us for both those events. After Philly will be, again, Fiber Day on the Hill in April. Our big Fiber Connect 2025 annual conference is in Nashville, June 1st to 4th. That's going to be absolutely epic. Then we'll be in Anchorage in July, in Toronto in August, Spokane in September, Scottsdale in October, Kansas City in November, and then we'll finish the year with our premier member meeting in Palm Springs, December 8th and 9th. That brings us to today's Five for Breakfast session with Rusty Williams, the President and CEO of Utilities Technology Council, UTC, who's going to be discussing working together for the betterment of the communications industry. But before I formally introduce today's guests, I'd like to introduce David Norris from our team, who will walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you very much, Gary, and good morning to everyone who's joined us today. We appreciate it. Before I go over a few logistics, we'd like to once again thank our platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco. Now, please keep in mind, as participants, you are in listen-only mode today. To ask a question, you can type it into the question box, which is located within the control panel in the upper right side of your screen. We will host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's session. This presentation is also being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours. And you can find that recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. And finally, at the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Please take a moment to do so. We appreciate your input. With that, I will pass things back over to Gary to get us started. Gary?
Well, thanks, David, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest was Sue Shen, the President of Hawaiian Telecom, who discussed Hawaiian Telecom and state leaders announced $1.7 billion investment to fiber up Hawaii. I have to say that Sue Shen is one of my favorite guests of all time. It is so impressive on what she's doing for the state of Hawaii as the president of Hawaiian Telecom. Hawaii is only allocated $149 million, that's million with an M, in BEAD funds. So Hawaiian Telecom is investing over $1 billion of their own capital to make Hawaii the first all-fiber state in the nation by 2026. Not the end of the decade, but by 2026. So if you missed last week's session, you can go to our website and watch the replay. Today on Five for Breakfast, our guest is Rusty Williams, President and CEO of UTC. We're discussing working together for the betterment of the communications industry. So Jimmy R. Rusty Williams is the President and CEO of UTC. UTC is a DC-based global trade association that represents electric, gas, and water utilities on their mission-critical information and communications technologies. Williams, a registered professional engineer in the state of Alabama, has more than 3 decades of extensive utility industry experience. He worked at Light River Technologies for 7 years, where he was vice president of sales before Light River. He worked for 4 years as director of business development at AFL. He's also worked more than 25 years at the Southern Company, where he held various telecommunications and IT management positions. In his role as president and CEO, Williams leads UTC's staff as the association continues to be a trusted advocate and thought leader on regulatory issues, emerging technologies, and as well as valued training resource in the utilities, communications, and networking space. Rusty earned his BS in EE from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. When he's not working for UTC, he's enjoying his family with his wife, Yvette, his 2 daughters, and 5 grandchildren. He enjoys playing golf, hunting, and serves in his church as a leader and teacher. So welcome, Rusty. And for our audience, please type in your questions as go, and we'll work those into discussions. With that, I will turn things over to Rusty.
Gary, I appreciate that. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you and your organization today and talk a little bit about UTC, but specifically about the industry. So that's the whole purpose is, there are various organizations like the Fiber Broadband Association and Utilities Technology Council that each has their niche and focus areas. But when we look at it from an industry perspective, then we're all about advancing the industry of critical infrastructure and telecommunications. So let's just get right into it. Let's get to the first slide, if you will, David. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, as Gary said, the UTC is a global association that's been around what is now the 77th year of the association. It started that many years ago with a group helping utilities work with the FCC to try to get radio licenses. So back then it was just about talking to their line crews via radio, but the organization has been around for that entire 77 years. And obviously through the course of the time, we've expanded the scope of UTC. We still deal with FCC issues, but a lot of other things as well. We have a bit of a global reach. We have sister associations that are in Europe, working with European utilities, as well as in South America. So we try to take a global approach. While we specifically look at the U.S. and North America, we do take a global approach to a lot of things. When you look at the organization and what we try to do for our memberships, it's we've got to focus on several areas. I'll say 4 or 5 areas. One is the issue or area of training and information dissemination. It's our responsibility or one of our jobs to try to help get the necessary industry information or technical information to our members. We provide platforms for cooperation or collaboration. That's one thing that I think is undersold in our industry is people love to get together, talk about issues, try to brainstorm problems, the solutions to problems that each of the utilities or members may have. Now, the one thing that's different about UTC as compared to some others, whether it's FBA or NRECA or APPA or whatever the alphabet soup is of the day, is we do have a different variety of utilities that are members. We have, as Gary said, the electric companies, the gas companies, the water companies that are members. We also have, the large investor-owned utilities, as well as the municipal utilities and, the rural electric co-ops. In addition to some suppliers, we call them associate members, but we have many of the equipment manufacturers. We have service providers, engineering companies, telecom service providers that are members of UTC as well. And all of that group of people, and they all have different, primary objectives, but it's all part of this industry, and we're all trying to work together to advance the telecommunications, IT, critical infrastructure. The term we like to use is ICT. You see the acronym on the screen here. It's just, a long phrase of information and communications technology. So all those things, all those technologies it takes for us to make these utility systems work. That's what we're about here at UTC. All right, David, let's try the next slide. So when we think about the different areas, from a technology perspective or a technical perspective, there's that, the acronym ICT again, but we're all about providing network resiliency for the utilities that are members of UTC. we all know that, regardless of what kind of utility you are, whether it's electric or gas or a water or telecommunications, when bad things happen, which we know is the case from time to time, whether it's the hurricanes or the ice storms or the wildfires or other things, the life doesn't start to get back to normal until those services start coming back, right? So, if we can provide control networks, operational technology networks that can help monitor, maybe keep outages from occurring in the utilities or get them back more quickly, then we see that as a success, because we need those services as communities to be able to operate on just a normal day-to-day basis. So these control networks are part of it, but many of our members that are also members of FBA are working to build out fiber broadband networks. As I said, we have electric co-ops and others that are members, and so we're working with them to help them make sure they have the information they need to build out those types of networks and for the betterment of their communities as well. We've been building fiber networks across utilities, particularly the electric utilities, for 40 years. Again, I've been around for a long time, as Gary described in my background. And back in the late 80s and early 90s, we were starting to build out some fiber optic networks for control purposes, for operational control purposes. So, we're always looking for better ways, quicker ways, more cost-effective ways to build these networks. And, we continue to work on those as part of conferences or webinars or other things that we do. We do a tremendous amount of work in the wireless part of the telecommunications space. Again, we started 77 years ago trying to get FCC licenses to talk to line trucks. That still exists today, but it's much broader when you think of all of the control devices, all the endpoints, whether it's meters on sides of houses, if it's, street lights all have communications capabilities these days. And, when you're talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of endpoints, then obviously the only way from a technical perspective or cost-effective technical perspective is to do it wirelessly. And that's a big part of what we do. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. Pole attachment issues is always a challenge, is we're all working to build out, these communications networks. So trying to do it in a secure and safe way is always part of the conversation, as well as being cyber safe as well. Utilities have a lot of expectations in terms of providing their services and building them in a way that these bad actors can't come in and disrupt the services. And obviously that's a big part of what we do at UTC as well. All right, David. So, we do advocacy work, as Gary was saying with FBA, you guys do that as well. But, when you look at it from a UTC perspective, as I'm just mentioned about wireless spectrum, that's a big advocacy area for us. Wireless spectrum is like beachfront property. There's only so much of it. And some of it, even though it might exist, is not very attractive. And so trying to work with the FCC, the NTIA to look for ways to get utilities access to wireless spectrum is always a challenge for us. We have had some success in recent times, but the need continues to grow as well. So we're working, not only in the U.S. with the FCC, but also globally with the ITU to try to find some parts of the spectrum that we can use globally, which helps us from a supply chain perspective, ecosystem perspective. Advocacy in the rural broadband deployment is a part of what we do as well. Trying to work with federal agencies in trying to understand what monies are available, what are the rules for getting those monies. Do it some at the state level as well. Grid security. We have a couple of people in our staff that, that's what they do. They're looking at the regulation associated with the cyber side of the electric grid, particularly the electric grid. And, that's always a challenge because the Cyber rules are about like the IRS rules. They're not black and white, and it takes a good bit of interpretation. And that's part of what we do for our members. And then pole attachment, as I mentioned, that's regulated at the FCC level for many of our members, and trying to find ways to continue to provide electricity services in a safe and reliable manner is part of the challenge, but at the same time not holding up and causing any issues, with the build out of broadband networks or other things. All right, David. When you think about the electric industry specifically, and again, we have water and gas members as well, but one of the big areas of challenge right now is on the electric side. Over the last 10 to 20 years, in the electric industry, we've been projecting actually a reduction in the electric demand across the U.S. There are reasons for that. We're getting more energy efficient. We're offsetting growth with energy efficiency gains. But now all of a sudden, over the last 5 years, that issue has completely flipped. And it's being driven primarily through the growth in data centers. When you look at the demand of data centers, across all of the large, companies, we call them the FANG companies, the Amazons, the Netflixes, the Googles, the Apples, and, those guys that are building all these data centers. Not only is there a demand for more data centers, but when you look at the technology that's being leveraged, artificial intelligence specifically, the power demand from those data centers has grown as much as 10 times. Now, we can throw numbers around pretty easily, and they may or may not mean anything, but when you look at doing the same instruction set in a non-AI data center with an AI-enabled data center, the electric demand can be as much as 10 times as great for those AI data centers. So now, all of a sudden, instead of a 1, 2, 3% a year demand reduction, we're looking at I've seen numbers anywhere from 5% annual growth to 18% annual growth. And when you throw 18% annual growth year over year, wow, all of a sudden we've got, some challenges because we've been taking, decommissioning old generating plants, for climate purposes and just, aging infrastructure purposes. And now we're looking at a case where we don't have enough power potentially. We can build windmills and we can put out solar panels, but when you're, talking about really large loads, then, that's a challenge. So we flipped the script a little bit. And, we're talking about building networks, and when the idea of resource planning, for 100 years, the electric companies, planned and built networks, their transmission grids and, their high voltage grids, using tools that had evolved over time. And now those tools are no longer valid. Those models aren't valid because, you've got smaller amounts of generation scattered over a larger area, and, how you're going to connect it together and move electricity around. We know climate, issues exist, and we could debate, what the cause is, but there is, impact when you look at, weather events and, the wildfires and the other things. And so that's something that utilities have got to deal with. And to fix a lot of these problems, it's going to take a lot of money, a lot of capital spending from the utilities of, building transmission lines to get from, one side of the state to the other, or one side of the country to the other. Generating plants, we talked about, all of a sudden now nuclear generation is back, looking as a viable option, to be able to feed a lot of these data centers. So the world's a little different place today than it was just 5 years ago. And so looking at all those challenges, and being able to leverage the technology that UTC members are dealing with, then, that's part of what we see. I used to joke with people that came into the telecom, part of the utility organizations, that if you wanted to be in the limelight, this was the wrong place, because you were just kind of in the background, kind of doing your thing. But now all of a sudden, these technologies are in the critical path of utilities being successful. And so we've got to find ways to work with the core businesses, whether it's, electricity was what we're talking about specifically, but any of the other types of utilities as well, and leverage some of these technologies like artificial intelligence and see it not only as a power consumer, but a provider of services back to the customer base of the utilities as well. So again, it's an interesting time to be in this part of the business, and it just proves if you live long enough, things can change in a hurry. David, let's wrap up with the last slide here. And as I mentioned earlier, groups like, Fiber Broadband Association, UTC, we all have our focus areas, but we're all part of this industry in some form or fashion. And we, a lot of our focus and a lot of our interests or a lot of our technology do overlap somewhat. So if we're looking, to try to help the industry, we're looking toward what I like to call the greater good, and not just look at my little silo or my little piece of the pie. Then I think there's ways that we can all work together. And can we argue one particular advocacy topic and do it in a way that we can have more impact? Or can we drive innovation and technology if we work together in certain areas? I mean, there are opportunities there. Again, we're not going to abandon our core focus areas and our constituencies, but I think there's areas there that we can work together. And if we remember, it's about our customers, our communities, then, if we keep that mindset, then I think there's good things out there to happen. Now, I talked a lot, Gary, and kind of said a lot at one time, but I'll stop there, take a breath, and, see if you've got any questions.
Well, Rossi, let's start with your members. So, you got electric, you have water, gas. Is it primarily electric and then some offer water and gas, or some offer water and electric, or do you have members that are just water or just gas?
There are a few just water members, but quite honestly, when you look at just raw numbers of members, it's mostly electric utilities that are members of UTC. But there are several of those members that are electric utilities, but they also provide water services or they also provide gas services. So, we're working as part of what I've been trying to do. I've been in this job for a little over a year now. And as I look at opportunities to make UTC more valuable to its members, provide more services, to this industry, I think that's one of the areas we're trying to kind of work our way through to see is there a need and what can we do to help the gas-only companies or the water-only companies.
Just to get as many questions in as possible.
Yeah.
So, the fastest growing segment in broadband is rural electric co-ops, right? There's 950 rural electric co-ops, 250 or so are doing broadband. Why doesn't every single member of UTC, why aren't they all launching broadband? Why shouldn't it be 100%?
You're talking about the different, other than the rural broadbands? Is that what
well, there's
or just the rural
950, so only 250 are doing broadband. IOU should be doing fiber. Munis should all be doing fiber, right? I mean, is there any reason why all these guys shouldn't be doing fiber?
It comes down to business decisions, quite honestly. When you look at a lot of the say the IOUs, their service territories are areas where there is a lot of options from telecommunications services providers, internet service providers. You may have 2 or 3, incumbents
like if you're
there
down
already.
in Alabama, right? Birmingham is kind of your go-to area, Southern
Right.
Company. So let's take Southern Company, Alabama Power. So they have tons and tons of dark fiber all across Alabama. All these ISPs would love to be able to leverage that. I know they have some plans in place to be able to wholesale out. So is that why we should look at IOUs as their opportunity with fiber, is to not only support their grid and all their substations and so forth, their communications, but also to a business model to lease dark fiber to ISPs across, because they're not selling to retail customers for broadband, but they could wholesale out their dark fiber.
Correct. Yeah. And when you look across many of the states across the country, you see that utilities are involved in the middle mile part of the network. Right. So, they have historically built networks, they being the IOUs, for operational purposes. So you've got, from point A at a generating plant to point B at a substation. But because of where those lines go, there's a lot of capability to be able to sell excess capacity, if you want to use that term, some fiber capacity from a middle mile perspective, and then let the last mile or the electric co-ops, whomever wants to build out to the end user, can then take it from that middle mile handoff point into their service territory.
Well, like even with what we're seeing is a lot of utilities are using broadband to subsidize their electric business, keep their rates low, keep their electricity prices very low for their members. Like United Fiber, they have I don't know 8 or 9,000 electric members, but they have 50,000 broadband customers, and so they're able to put millions towards keeping their electric rates low. Is that something you're seeing an interest across your membership?
I think it depends on which segment it is. I think the more toward the rural side, where there's not as much competition or any competition, you're seeing the higher likelihood of that happening, to where when you're into the metropolitan areas where there are services available already, then it's a little less than that. I think when the IOUs, it comes down to business models. It's what are your ratepayers, what are your shareholders, and for IOUs, your stockholders, what are they expecting? We have seen over the course of history is the utilities that are that are IOUs. You start getting into different businesses. Sometimes it confuses the stockholders, and they're trying to figure out, are you a telecom company, are you an electric company, are you a generation company, whatever. And it just comes down to business models for each of those.
The answer is yes, right? But so let me. You mentioned about cybersecurity. Think about grid security. So like municipalities like EPB, one of your members, they're launched the world's first commercial quantum network. Is that what your members looking at? How are they going to get involved in quantum networking to protect the grid and protect from bad actors?
Yeah, I mean, specifically quantum networking, there are a handful of companies looking at that. I mean, we're looking specifically at the NERC CIP requirements for the security of the electric grid specifically. So trying to help interpret those rules, trying to find ways. I mean, one of the services that we're kicking off this year is that we're providing a service where manufacturers can have equipment certified according to the ISA standards. And then, we all have to ask, where's this stuff made? Is it made in China? Is it made in some place that it's not supposed to be made, or we're not supposed to have it in the grid? So, we're trying to get involved with a lot of that and pre-certify, so people can just pull up a database and go, okay, I see this manufacturer or this company has been pre-screened and has been certified as not being, a bad actor or coming from a place where there could be some potential question.
So like the Commerce Entity List, or the Buy America, Build America, Buy America.
Correct. Yeah. So if we have a database that shows that, then that makes it easier for everybody to be able, if you're a member, have access to that or subscribe to it or whatever the business model is. Then you could go, okay, well, I can use these 3 companies, but I can't use that one because of issues associated with that particular topic.
So one of the things that's key to the broadband industry is streamlining deployment. And so obviously trying to streamline permitting and things like that. But obviously pole attachments is an area of key concern. Is there some way that UTC can work together with us to help streamlining and have more unified pole attachment agreements, so we're not going to work in state by state and town by town and company by company?
Yeah, short answer is yes. Right? It's it's a balance of the safety issues and the security issues with the build out issues. I mean, we've had those very same conversations at the FCC of, are there opportunities? Well, yes, there are. Let's look for those common areas that I referred to earlier, and let's see if we can come to a mutual agreement. And here's the spec, here's the process, here's the approval, process, whatever it happens to be. But there are win-win opportunities there for everybody, instead of looking for some kind of, lose-lose, that takes more time and effort and money.
All right. Last question is, a couple of years ago, I was meeting with the CEOs of all the utility companies, out in Napa, and they had the head of GM's EVs came in and said, when we hit 6% adoption of EVs, we're at the tipping point. Where are we nationally on being ready for EV infrastructure?
Yeah, that's going to be a challenge for a while until we get some of this infrastructure built. I think we're going to see a slowdown now with the new administration, with some of the executive orders that we've seen come out of President Trump's office. But I think the challenge is still there. It may be pushed out just a little bit. You got to have the infrastructure in place to be able to charge those vehicles if we have them. You got to be able to supply that energy to those chargers. Even if you've got them, do you have the ability to actually feed electricity to them? I think you're looking at, some years out. I don't know. And when I say some years, I think it's probably high single digits. I don't think it's, 50 years out. I think it's something, much sooner than that. But I think it's going to slow down just a little bit to have a little bit more of a common sense approach from an infrastructure perspective, so that we can do what we need to do rather than making a declaration and hoping the infrastructure catches up to it.
Well, Rusty, I'd like to extend an invitation to every single one of your members to come join us in Nashville, June 1st through 4th, to see what's going on in the broadband industry. And we'd be happy to provide a UTC discount for all your members to make it a little easier for them to join us. But we would love to have you guys join us and provide any feedback on ways that we can collaborate to really accelerate, not only get more broadband out there, but to help to have a more secure grid and be able to get ready for AI and quantum networking and everything coming down the line. So really appreciate.
I appreciate that offer, and our annual conference is a couple of weeks after yours in Long Beach, California. So I'm sure we can work something out to reciprocate. So we look forward to being able to work together.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. I look forward to getting back together next Wednesday with Eric Bathurst, the Chief Technology Officer for Infrastructure in Maryland's Department of Information Technology, discuss State of Maryland bridges digital divide with new digital infrastructure group, or DIG. You're not going to want to miss that, and we'll see you guys next Wednesday. Thanks again, Rusty. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.